Well, welcome to the 700 Club, folks. We've got a lot of stuff for you today. I mean, things are just going on all over the world, and you want to be with us because we'll tell you about them. The world is watching as President Trump meets with one-on-one with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. That's taking place in Singapore. How much history is made depends on whether the president can convince the dictator to get rid of his nuclear arsenal. As far as I'm concerned, the big thing he's got to do is to convince the dictator to free the people that are held in the gulags throughout North Korea. That country's never going to achieve anything unless they let the people free. And whether Kim Jong-un is willing to give up his power to do that, well, it remains a big question mark. Terry?
Well, it's the first time that a sitting U.S. president has met a North Korean leader. CBN's national security correspondent Eric Rosales has the latest on this historic summit.
President Trump landed in Singapore, confident about his chances of success at the high-stakes summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, tweeting, "Great to be in Singapore. Excitement is in the air," but warning, it's now or never.
It's a one-time shot, and I think it's going to work out very well.
Hours earlier, Kim touched down, arriving with his sister, and made his way to his hotel in a black limousine with North Korean flags on the hood and bodyguards running alongside. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying Kim understands what the United States wants.
The talks continue this afternoon, even as we sit here now. They're in fact moving quite rapidly, and we anticipate they will come to their logical conclusion even more quickly than we had anticipated.
Of course, the president's ultimate goal hasn't changed: the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. This is the rogue country is very close to successfully hitting the continental United States with a nuclear missile. U.S. Senator Republican Lindsey Graham said he's drafted an authorization for the use of military force that he wants his Senate colleagues to sign in the event diplomacy fails.
There's really only two options: peace or war.
Whether he gets an agreement out of this summit, the president believes sitting down with Kim is forward progress.
But at a minimum, I do believe at least we'll have met each other. We will have seen each other. Hopefully we will have liked each other.
Religious freedom and human rights advocates like Open Doors USA see the summit as an opportunity to help the country's persecuted Christians, sponsoring a global online prayer summit at the exact time the two leaders meet.
This is so important because things do shift. And God is the God of the universe. He's bigger than politics. He's bigger than any one leader. And we know these regimes are fragile. We know things can change overnight.
In the end, the two sides could come up with a peace treaty that would end the Korean War, which is technically still in place since the 1950s. Eric Rosales, CBN News.
Thanks, Eric. North Korea was once a land of churches. It was a very religious country, and after the communists took over, all that's been obliterated, and it's been a hideous nightmare for the people living there. I was with the Marines in 1950 and a little bit in 51, and over in Korea, it was a bleak, freezing cold land. But I tell you, if this succeeds, good for the president. But it's sort of iffy. Well, stay with CBNNews.com for live coverage of that summit, as well as the global online prayer meeting. That's at 4 o'clock tonight. There's 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock. In other news, President Trump shook up the G7 meeting in Canada over the weekend. Ephraim Graham has more.
Pat, President Trump is lashing out at Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over trade issues, tweeting from Singapore, "Sorry, we cannot let our friends or enemies take advantage of us on trade anymore. We must put the American worker first." The president ruffled feathers at the G7 summit, not backing down from stiff tariffs on aluminum and steel imports. Trudeau promised to slap his own tariffs on American goods. The Trump administration fired back.
There's a special place in hell for any foreign leader that engages in bad faith diplomacy with President Donald J. Trump and then tries to stab him in the back on the way out the door.
POTUS is not going to let a Canadian prime minister push him around. Kim must not see American weakness.
President Trump refused to sign a solidarity agreement with the other G7 members and suggested more tariffs could be in the works. Pat?
You know, I'm with those people who are a little concerned at this point. I'm a fan of the president, as you probably have learned, but I am concerned about this kind of behavior. We can't cozy up to our bitter enemies and stick our finger in the eyes of our friends. They're our friends, and I think a lot of this needs to be done behind the scenes. If you're displeased with the trade relationships with your allies, then talk to them behind the scenes. Don't have an argument and then walk out of a situation and fail to sign the communicating that you yourself have helped draft. It just leaves us isolated. I think I would like to know what the president's game plan is. He may have one. If he does, he needs to tell people, here's what I'm trying to do. Ephraim?
Pat, in Britain, demonstrators marched for imprisoned activist Tommy Robinson Saturday. Hundreds of angry protesters gathered outside Prime Minister Theresa May's office demanding Robinson's release. Some attempted to breach the security barriers outside the Prime Minister's office. Robinson is serving a 13-month sentence simply for live streaming outside a courthouse where a Muslim gang was on trial for rape. He's been outspoken about the growing Islamist influence in the UK. He told CBN News in 2016 he's convinced he'll be killed someday. His supporters fear he could be murdered in prison. Here at home, conservatives are preparing for what looks to be an epic battle in November's midterm elections. Over the weekend, headliners at the annual Road to Majority event included Vice President Mike Pence, lawmakers, and one of the people just pardoned by President Donald Trump. Our Jenna Browder brings us more on this story now from Washington.
It's an annual event that brings the biggest names in conservative politics together under one roof.
And it is worth the fight.
The Faith and Freedom Coalition made this year's goal to keep the majority in November.
There's a lot of talk right now about the House flipping this fall. How concerned are you?
Well, I'd say if the election was today, we'd keep the majority. History plays against us, but if you watch what has happened, since we passed the tax bill, we just hit 1 million new jobs.
House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy and other Republican lawmakers are playing up their accomplishments.
Judges, principled constitutionalist judges defending our rights.
Success with North Korea would be another major win.
Our president is going into this summit with his eyes wide open. And as he said earlier today, he'll know in the first minute if they're serious and if they're not.
Dinesh D'Souza, the conservative filmmaker just pardoned by President Trump, talked about him with me and David Brody.
I think that Trump, believe it or not, is the true inheritor of the Reagan mantle. He is.
It's this same enthusiasm Faith and Freedom hopes will spread to the polls.
I could go on and on.
Ralph Reed and his team are planning an $18 million push to make the case that this election is just as important as 2016.
Let's talk about the economy.
Yes.
How much credit should President Trump get?
I think he should get the majority of all the credit.
Maybe, but if the House does flip this fall and Republicans lose control, Democrats are likely to pursue Trump's impeachment. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Conservative media icon Charles Krauthammer is dying of cancer. He says he has only weeks to live. He got his start in mainstream media, but soon became a leading voice on conservative issues, contributing to outlets like Fox News. The 68-year-old has had cancer tumors removed from his abdomen last August, and despite some health complications, he thought he was making progress toward healing. In a farewell letter, he says he will leave this life with no regrets. Praying for him. Pat?
Well, I don't know whether he'll leave it with no regrets, but I've got a regret that he's leaving because he is one outstanding spokesman. You know, I used to watch that program on Fox just to hear what he had to say, because he was a brilliant, is a brilliant analyst of current affairs and world affairs, and he gets to the heart of the issue with his statements. So he'll be sorely missed. I tell you, I've been wondering where he was, and that this health thing is difficult, and one would hope that somewhere in the miracle of the Lord there might be a healing for him. But he's been a great voice and a tremendous intellect and a very brave fighter, because he's had that, you know, he broke his neck diving into a swimming pool, and he's been paralyzed, but he's in a wheelchair, but you'd never know it. So my hat's off to a great man, and my sorrow goes with his passing. Ephraim.
Pat, celebrity suicides are calling attention to an alarming epidemic in America. Fashion designer Kate Spade and famed chef Anthony Bourdain both took their own lives last week. And new research now shows more people die from suicide than murder or car accidents. As Lori Johnson reports, suicide touches all types of people, including the rich and famous and even Christians.
The CDC issued a devastating report showing the suicide rate increased a whopping 25% in less than just 2 decades, now making it into the top 10 leading causes of death. They pointed out that in 2016 alone, 45,000 Americans took their own lives. The very same week the CDC released its suicide report, 2 celebrities stunned the world by apparently taking their lives. Police say 55-year-old fashion icon Kate Spade hanged herself in her Park Avenue apartment. And 61-year-old traveling TV chef Anthony Bourdain reportedly hanged himself in a luxury French hotel.
Yeah, there's a verse in Ecclesiastes that says, all the labors of a man's hands are for his mouth, but his soul goes unsatisfied. You know, with money and fame comes a lot of pressure. I think their own unique world of pain.
As president of the American Association of Christian Counselors, Dr. Timothy Clinton says even people of faith struggle with suicidal depression and shouldn't be ashamed to seek help.
The church, the community of believers out there need to get more serious about mental health related issues and themes in everyday life. We need to bring this to the front and center, the forefront of the church.
Suicide warning signs include talking about suicide or feelings of hopelessness, contacting people to say goodbye, and giving things away. People feeling desperate can get immediate help by calling the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-TALK. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
An alarming increase, Pat.
You know, folks, depression is real. It's not just something figment of somebody's imagination. There are many chemical causes of depression, and a person needs to have clinical blood work done to determine what's going on in their mind, because these things can be there. But I know from personal experience, and I don't want to alarm anybody, there is such a thing as a spirit of suicide. I mean, it's a demonic spirit. It may play off depression, it may play off drug use, it may play off the environment, it may play off a lot of things. But there is clearly something that brings to a person's mind thoughts of hopelessness, thoughts of betrayal. It just goes all down the line. And when it's finished, it's kind of like, what's left for you but to kill yourself? But I tell you, to see somebody like Anthony Bourdain, who seemed to be living a perfect life as a celebrity chef, to see that happening, Kate Spade dying, but these are just the tip of the iceberg. And we need, when we find that, we need to get help, and especially if it has a biological foundation. The people need to get treated, and they need to get treated by skillful practitioners. Ephraim?
Pat, the Transportation Security Administration has come under heavy criticism on social media after some 9 million people watched a woman's video of TSA agents searching her 96-year-old mother in a wheelchair. CBS News reports the incident took place at Washington's Dulles International Airport on May 15th. TSA told CBS it had no indication the woman was in distress during that check. Jean Clarkson says her mother doesn't want to ever fly again. Unbelievable, Pat.
You know, somebody was laughing when I was in a van leaving an airport. He said, you know what TSA stands for? I said, no, it stands for thousands standing around. And that's what they are. They're a bunch of incompetents in the TSA. It is simply appalling how they can misuse their thought. And many of them, I mean, they seem to be predators, and they take advantage of some of the flyers, and the approaches of body searches are just too intrusive. But there's something more. But here's a woman in a wheelchair, and to go through that for her, it was just an outrageous thing. These people should be fired. They should be terminated. They should not be allowed to be working for the United States government. But they put on thousands of them by Obama. He just wanted to fill up the ranks of that thing, and it was a good dumping ground for people he wanted to give jobs. And they still aren't trained. They still aren't qualified. Some are, of course. I mean, thank goodness for them. But some of the intrusive behavior that takes place, and it's so unwanted. You know, Terry, you've been to Israel. You know, I mean, they know what they're doing.
They absolutely know what they're doing. And you feel a sense of almost intimidation, but at the same time, you realize that security is a huge issue, but nobody touches you. I mean, it's all...
Well, in Israel, they pre-screen. They know in advance who's coming in and what the deal is, and they have all kinds of clear signs to notify them that they're dealing with a terrorist or somebody that might blow up a plane. But how old was that woman?
96.
96-year-old woman in a wheelchair, and to have somebody going all over her body looking for, I mean, what do they think she's going to do? Blow the plane up? I mean, this is nonsense. It really is. You're not staying any safer because of this. It's just an intrusion on the traveling public that ought to be stopped. Ephraim.
Pat, Justify has become the 13th horse to win the Triple Crown. The Chestnut Colt crossed the finish line with a lead of nearly 2 lanes. Jockey Mike Smith celebrated and pointed his praises upward.
First and foremost, I thank my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, for blessing me on this wonderful day. We're all so blessed we made it back safe. This horse ran a tremendous race. He's so gifted. He's sent from heaven, I tell you.
Smith is the oldest jockey to win the Triple Crown and trainer. Bob Baffert is only the 2nd trainer in history to win the Triple Crown twice. All praises to God indeed, Pat.
I tell you, it's an amazing thing. The owner of Justify is a born-again Christian. My daughter knows him and his wife. They live in Dallas. Mike Smith is the oldest jockey.
Yeah.
And this is the first time, the second time, I think, in like 40 years. And that is an enormously gifted accomplishment, because the Belmont is 1.5 miles, and it is exhausting. And after the Derby and then after the Preakness, to have a horse that's won both of those, they come back and win the Belmont is just extraordinary. And it's just, I'm speechless.
Everybody's talking about, well, people who were there are so happy they were there to see such a historic event. It was really special.
Well, so it's a big thing. I mean, I don't know how you compare it to other sports, but this is an extraordinary accomplishment, because usually what happens when horses get to that level, they're pretty much exhausted already. They're only 3-year-olds. And to run 1.5 miles and been the only other horse that did that without any trouble was Secretariat, who was he was a class all by himself. He won the Belmont, I think, by 31 lengths. It was unbelievable. But this Justify, that's a Christian name, Justify.
I like it.
How about that? Okay.